Hello everyone, welcome back. Today I'm just going to do a little bit of a reading wrap-up. I only have two books really to talk about because I've only finished two books in the last couple of weeks. I've been reading other books in between, lots of short nonfiction. I'm still in the middle of the Sherlock Holmes stories. I just started another book, a really slow reread of a book I've read a couple of times before. So I'm just going to start with the two books that I've read, and the first is Alistair MacLean's Where Equals Dare. So I tried to read this several years ago and I didn't make it very far into it. And I've always wanted to go back and finish it. So I just started it from the beginning. I had only made it about 30 or 40 pages in on that first attempt. So it wasn't really a huge setback. And I remembered it very well, actually. And there is Alistair MacLean on the back there. And I didn't really enjoy this book. There were elements of it that I really liked. It had a lot of potential, but ultimately it let me down. And we'll just go through the plot real quick. So the whole idea is that it's 1944, or maybe late 1943, and an American general with plans of the Allied invasion of Europe has crashed in Germany, in the German Alps, and been taken to the castle which serves as Gestapo headquarters. And it is on the side of a cliff, and the only way you can get to it is through a little cable car. A team of British and American commandos have been stuck in a Lancaster bomber on very quick notice and flown out to the German Alps through Switzerland, illegally, by the way. They're not supposed to go through Switzerland, it's neutral territory. And they parachute onto a mountainside in Germany in the middle of a blizzard. And the main character is called Smith. I don't remember his first name or his rank or anything at the moment, and Smith is pretty prototypical of a lot of Alistair MacLean's later main characters in that they're very experienced men who are not what they appear to be at first glance. They are usually operating under some kind of vast cover, like a very serious cover. So they are usually really well-educated mountaineers, really accomplished men, very highly educated, but they are usually put under a lower rank of some sort, and the people around them do not know their actual true mission, and the reader doesn't know their actual true mission either. And that's one of the things that is kind of frustrating about later Alistair MacLean novels, is that although the main character knows all kinds of things about this operation that's going on, we are only given it in bits and pieces over the narrative. And it comes in sort of a hairpin fashion. And it comes not through the actual plot developing, but through dialogue or through their thoughts. And so we gradually become aware more and more of what Smith's true mission is. And so they land on this mountainside, and one of them is killed in the landing for this parachuting. But Smith goes up and checks it, and he can tell that this man was not killed by landing in this parachute. He was hit over the head with a rock. And at the same time, on that plane, there had been hidden a young woman. She's in her early 20s or her late teens. Her name is Mary Ellison. And she knows Smith, but none of the other men who parachuted into Germany know that she was on this plane. And so right away we're going, okay, well, why is she here? What's going on? Why do these other guys not know about her? What is going on? And she seems really unprepared for all this, like she doesn't belong. And so Smith is trying to hide her presence from these other men, and their whole idea, see, they are dressed as German Alpenjäger, so like mountain troops, mountain soldiers. And they sneak into this town that is near this castle. And the town is really used for training recruits and that sort of thing of the Alpenjäger. And so there are hundreds of soldiers there, and their presence is not going to be noticed. And they are quickly captured. So Mary Ellison, Smith first introduces Mary Ellison to one of their operatives that is working in this town as a barmaid. And she gets Mary into this castle as her cousin who needs a job and she's going to be a servant at this castle. But the other men are captured, and Smith and an American commando get away, and so the Germans start hunting them, and they take the other men up to this castle. And so it becomes this story of them sneaking into the castle and going in to find this American general, right? But things are not what they seem, and we gradually become aware that Smith is on an entirely different mission than it appears at first. And it quickly devolves into like double and triple agents and the true story, and we become aware that I hate to give away too much of this book, but I feel like I need to, so if you don't want to hear it, just skip ahead. There is a mole in the British High Command who is feeding the Germans information. And the whole plot of this book is really about flushing out this mole and getting rid of him so that he won't be able to reveal the truth of the Allied invasion plans. And so through twists and turns and these hairpin reveals of what's going on, I mean, it just takes like a 90-degree turn. And there's no lead up to it. There's no, well, maybe this is happening. And that's another flaw of Alistair MacLean, is he had a tendency later on to reveal things through dialogue, and it's just, well, everything you know is not right. Now this is right. And he keeps doing that. And that's a little frustrating because I feel like if that had been gradual, if we had built up to that, if we had seen from the beginning that Smith is not what he appears to be, that Smith is on this other secret mission, and that the main admiral back at the Admiralty, he's not like the first Lord of the Admiralty, I don't think, but he's very high up. He knows what's going on, and if we had seen that better, if we could have seen Smith's suspicions from the beginning, rather than just being, oh, and by the way, and oh, and by the way, and oh, and by the way, this also. That's a little bit frustrating about later Alistair MacLean novels. His first novels really didn't do that so much. And another thing that kind of frustrated me about this is that Smith, even though they are operating in Nazi Germany, they are fighting these enemies, he basically refuses to kill anyone. And that becomes a problem as this novel goes on. He is like all about justice, which justice is fine, but this is a wartime operation. This is a commando operation. And the people, the soldiers that he refuses to kill, they come back later on in the story and thwart things multiple times. And at one point they have like the chief of Gestapo and German intelligence, and they just let them go. They just let them go in a very strange way that seems very suspicious if you were there going, why did they do all this? If you're the enemy and you're going, why did they do all this? The manner in which they went about doing this would seem very, very suspicious to you. And there's another thing about Alistair MacLean's later novels, which is that because he was mainly writing for money, and he was by this time very, very famous. A bunch of his novels had been turned into movies by this time. So you have Ice Station Zebra, and The Guns of Navarone, which is what propelled him to international fame almost overnight. There was it a Gregory Peck movie? I've never actually seen that movie. But as things went by, as time went by, Alistair MacLean started to very obviously write for the screen. And so as I was reading this book, I was thinking, this doesn't work in the book, but it works in a movie. These are not scenes like he was writing when he was younger. These are scenes like if I was going to write a movie script and then flesh out that movie script afterwards. And I could just kind of imagine him in his head thinking, this will play really well on the screen. And if I get my friend Richard Burton to be the star of this movie, You know, I felt that. I felt that from like very early on. I thought that he was writing this as a movie and that he was thinking about his friend Richard Burton, the great actor Richard Burton, who was married to Elizabeth Taylor several times. Very interesting man, Richard Burton, by the way. There's a fascinating interview with him and Dick Cavett. If you are not even interested in acting or anything, it's still a fascinating story, still a fascinating interview, and I will link to that. I don't think anybody ever actually watches the links that I provide for things like that, but that is one of my favorite interviews on all of YouTube, and it's very much worth watching. Even if you're not interested in Richard Burton, if you have no idea who he is, um, it's a fascinating story. And I'm pretty sure this was made into a movie starring Richard Burton. I haven't seen it, um, but that just is really frustrating. And one of the things that frustrated me the most about this book was something I didn't really know, which is that the Nazis actually built helicopters. There were only 20 of them. Now, there were two or three different models, but the largest one, the one that's in this book, they had built 20 of them, and then the factory was bombed out of existence. And so Alistair MacLean puts a helicopter in this novel in 1944, 1943. That's really interesting, but he does absolutely nothing with it. And so it's just this tantalizing, like, why did you put it in the novel if you weren't going to use it? All they do is, um, I think one of the commandos sneaks over and destroys the distributor cap so it can't take off. And it's just like, why? Why did you use it if you weren't going to like? I was just so frustrated by the addition of this helicopter, which I had never heard of. I had to actually go looking to see the history of this thing and to find out it was indeed real. And that, but why? Why would you add that to your book and then just destroy it and make absolutely no use of it when it could have been put to really good use in this story, either by the commandos or by the enemy? And um, there are some really unrealistic bits and that sort of thing. Um, it's interesting, it's entertaining, it's an interesting story, but all along the way I was thinking to myself, why did you write it like that? Why did you go with that choice? It seems like the tension could have been built better in another way, and the plot could have been more realistic if Smith had been. I think if you're going to have a, I think the trouble with this is that the commandos are kind of, they are in that very 60s vein of commando movies where they're making funny quips and that sort of thing, and they're very likable guys, and they don't seem like cold-blooded killers or anything like that. But I kind of feel in this situation where you have this huge plot going on under the surface, where you have these commandos who need to get into this Gestapo headquarters and prevent this exchange of information, prevent them from torturing or drugging this American general, who is also, by the way, not what he seems, into revealing all these Allied plans. It seems to me that it needs to be a bit more gritty and it needs to be a bit more cold-blooded. I mean, I don't believe that any commando group in history would have snuck into Gestapo headquarters and not had to kill anyone to do it. I just, that sort of didn't work for me. And MacLean would do that later on in his writing career, and I'm really not sure why, because he didn't pull his punches like that when he was writing as a younger man. Uh, so like I said, I think this is my 17th Alistair MacLean novel. I have almost all of his other novels. I do have all of his novels that I have not read yet, as far as I know. The one that I don't have right now is The Satan Bug, and I've already read that. And I'm going to keep reading Alistair MacLean's novels, but as I get further and further into his career, later on in time, the 60s, the 70s, the quality really, really goes down from what he was writing in the 50s. And I'm interested now in seeing if he continued to write mainly with the big screen in mind. If he, and I have read a few of his later books after this one, and they were not particularly good either. I really want to read a book of Alistair MacLean's from the 70s that really has that spirit with which he wrote Night Without End, HMS Ulysses, South South by Java Head. But I'm just not certain that he ever returned to that sort of intensity, to that sort of level. And so my Alistair MacLean reading quest continues, and this was another entertaining but overall disappointing read for me. It was just kind of disappointing. Which is, like I said, it was entertaining, but it lacks the fire and it lacks that. If you've ever read Night Without End or South by Java Head or HMS Ulysses, then you'll understand what I'm saying. It just seems like a totally different sort of tale here. I guess like gamers call it being nerfed, right? Where you take all that danger out of it, where you take all that, where you make everything kind of gentler, and I don't know, it just doesn't work for me, and it doesn't work for me as an Alistair MacLean novel. I don't know. I remember The Guns of Navarone kind of having that feeling to me also, but I haven't read that in about 14 years, and I would just have to return to that to see if it was like that. I would kind of hate to go back and realize that it was always like that, though. But I know it wasn't like that in Night Without End, and I know it was not like that in HMS Ulysses. Anyway, I'm going to move on now. So the next book that I read, or that I finished anyway, was Louis L'Amour's Kilkenny. And so I recently bought this, I think I bought this on last Tuesday, and I read it in a day, I believe. I read it either in a day, or I read half of it and then finished the rest in the morning. I think that's what I did, because it is quite short, and it's easy to read, and it's fast-paced. It's only 150 pages exact. And so I read this with June on the Range in mind. I bought this with June on the Range in mind, but I always get antsy around June on the Range. I have quite a few Westerns, and I want to read them. I really do want to read them, but I'm not all that interested in the Old West, to be honest. I'm not all that interested in Westerns, and it's not like from thinking I'm better than reading Westerns or anything like that, because I have read some really good Westerns over the years. So there are great Westerns out there. And even Louis L'Amour has written some great Westerns that I have read. This was not one of them. This is the third or fourth in this Kilkenny cycle. And I don't think you would need to read the other books at all I didn't, and I wasn't lost or anything like that. But it frustrated me because from the very beginning, Kilkenny is wounded, and he's riding away into a new land that he's never been to before, and he comes to this stagecoach station. This is the very first page. Page 1, page 2. And he goes in, he's been wounded, and he has like a bloody rag on his shoulder. And there are these people he's never met, never seen before, has no idea who they are. He walks in, and trouble follows Kilkenny everywhere he goes. Right? Kilkenny is that guy. He's the greatest gun in the West. Bar none. He is the greatest quick draw gunslinger in the West. The greatest tracker, the greatest woodsman. He is the best at everything he has ever done, ever. But trouble follows him everywhere he goes. Every store he steps in, some young guy with a gun wants to challenge him. And that's what happens here. He walks into this stagecoach station to get some food, and a guy basically, it's very quick, I'll just read it to you. The tall man flushed slightly but said nothing. But from down the table came a new voice. Whatever it was scratched him, the voice says. It looks like it hit him running away. The dead silence that followed saw the tall man turn pale and cold. He lifted his head, his green eyes going down the table to the man who had spoken. He was a tough, handsome youngster with a look of eager recklessness about him. If you were joking, the tall man said, say so. The man beside the tall man ducked suddenly and rolled off the bench, while others drew back from the blond young man. The youngster got slowly to his feet. I wasn't joking, he said, with a faint sneer. It looks to me like you was running away. As he spoke, he went for his gun, and what happened then was seen with utter, piercing clarity by all who watched. The tall man seemed deliberately to hesitate the split second it took for the blond young man's hand to strike the butt of his gun. Then he palmed his own gun and shot. The blond man staggered. His gun, half drawn when the shot struck him, slid back into the holster. The man backed up, sat down, and rolled over on his face, coughing blood and death. For an instant the room was still, broken by the young woman. She stared with horror at the tall man. You murderer, she cried, her lips twisting. This is by a man who don't want no trouble. Kilkenny doesn't want any trouble. So here's the trouble. Kilkenny walks into a station filled with people he doesn't know that he'll never see again in his whole life. Somebody accuses him of being a coward that he's never met, that he doesn't know. And instead of just going like, well, this is no big deal, I'm just going to get my food and leave. I don't ever have to see this person again or deal with him again. I don't want any trouble. I don't actually want any trouble. I'm going to just shoot this guy. I'm going to wait for him. I'm going to challenge him, wait for him to make a move and shoot him. But I don't want any trouble. I'm running away from trouble, pal. Okay, I get it. I get it. It's that masculine thing where a guy challenges you and then you have to stand up for yourself. And in the Old West, everybody's armed. And so you got to pull your pistol. But that's not the sign of a man who don't want any trouble, okay? That's a sign very much of a man who is going from place to place and creating trouble everywhere he goes for himself. And, okay, yeah, he saved his pride in front of these strangers, but he has now killed the son, unknowingly, he has killed the son of a local cattle baron who is ruthless and cunning, and he wants more than anything to take over this whole southeastern Nevada, or southeastern Utah. And so Kilkenny rides out of here, and he goes to this place he's never seen before in southeastern Utah. It's this beautiful valley. It's like a canyon valley. I don't think Louis L'Amour did a particularly good job in this book either of describing the setting, which is rather odd because usually he was really good about that. And I really didn't get the flavor of southeastern Utah until almost the end of this book, actually. And so this is where Kilkenny is going. He's just come to this valley and decided this is where I'm going to live the rest of my life, right here in this valley. And he knows there's a town down here called Horsehead, so he goes to the town. And of course, he walks into town, and from the very beginning, he immediately becomes well known by the sheriff and the constable and the doctor and the bartenders, and it's that kind of book where everybody recognizes Kilkenny's greatness immediately and flocks to him, and there's these "I'm the big man around here" conversations and that sort of thing. And from there, the coincidences become frustrating. There's a man named Dolan who is like the local cattle wrestler crook guy who runs like a billiards hall, and all the bad guys kind of congregate there. But he's not really a bad guy. He's not a murderer. He doesn't hurt anybody. He's just out to make some money here and there as he can. And Dolan they both rode with, I think, Phil Sheridan. And so they were both Union soldiers in the Civil War. And not only were they both under the same commander, I think it was Phil Sheridan. I'm not sure if it was Phil Sheridan, but that's the only Sheridan I can think of off the top of my head. Dolan tells Kilkenny a story about how he remembers that Kilkenny had saved a Union soldier that was holed up in a barn by himself and wounded, and that the Confederates were trying to kill him, and Kilkenny had saved the soldier. And oh, by the way, that soldier was me. So you saved my life, and whatever you need, I've got your back. How likely is that exactly? I mean, it's not the most outrageous thing that's ever happened, but it's not very likely. And then on top of that, we learn that Kilkenny has been, he was in love with a woman back east, and because Kilkenny was just dangerous and all these men always wanted to try to shoot him and make their name, and everywhere he goes, trouble follows him, whereas I think that everywhere you go, there you are, right? There he is. Everywhere trouble happens to be, Kilkenny happens to be. This woman has just packed up all her stuff and moved to this same place in southeast Utah. And she has started a ranch, and she has a big ranch full of cattle. And so he learns this, and he's going, oh no, how do I deal with this? That's another huge, outrageous coincidence. And oh yeah, by the way, the Jared Tetlow, the father of the guy that he killed in the very beginning, is coming into town with all his bad guys. They're called the 40, even though there's like 50 of them. It's, you know, the 40 Ranch, the Bar 40, or the Circle 40. I have no idea. It's just the 40. And he's ruthless, and he is a one-dimensional character through and through who is just greedy and power hungry, and we don't learn anything about why he is the way that he is. And the townspeople take sides with Kilkenny or with Tetlow, and the Tetlow has a bad guy named Havalik, and he is like this cold-blooded, beady-eyed gunslinger. And anyway, so the rest of the story is about Kilkenny trying to triumph over Tetlow. He wants to bring him to justice. Right, he wants to bring this bad guy who is going around killing all these innocent people to justice. And he wants to save his lady love there. And she's also very strong-willed, clearly, and she's overjoyed to find, she just knew somehow that Kilkenny would come to this unknown, this strange land, because he's a man who wants strange land. And okay, I know I'm being hard on this, but it's not just that. So Louis L'Amour will amp up the tension and then pour cold water on it. And then amp up the tension and then pour cold water on it. It's like this terrible pacing throughout the whole book where we're being told that this big, huge thing is happening and Kilkenny has to go save them from this big, huge thing. And then it just fizzles out. So there's one scene where the very bad guy, Havlik, is chasing down all these civilians to kill them, to murder them, and take them out, and to prevent anyone on the outside world from knowing what's going on. And Kilkenny rides after them for days, literally for days, and this is the bad guy that it's supposed to all come to a head with, right? This is the greatest gunslinger in the West meeting the other greatest gunslinger in the West. And what does he do? He disarms all of them, empties Havlik's pistol into Havlik's hat, gives him back his pistols, and lets them all go and says, you'll need these for when we meet up later on. You've met right there, man. Meet it up. You've met right here. This should be the showdown. This right here should be the big showdown, but it's not. And that's the thing. It comes to a head, and then it comes to a head, and then comes to a head. I mean, I keep saying that, but it happens over and over and over in this. And this was just written, I guess this was written at a breakneck speed or something. But that pacing problem, that issue where, and he likes to leave in the parts that probably should be left out. So when the book finally comes to the big climax, part of the climax is incredibly disappointing, right? Like whatever happens with Jared Tetlow, I found that very disappointing. And then what happens between Kilkenny and Havlik the gunslinger is, he goes into I'm not going to tell you the whole thing, but I mean there's a showdown and he goes into town and they're in the middle of this gang war basically. But some bad things happen on one side of the town, and then instead of like it being this big final battle, Kilkenny's like, yeah, that happened. Well, better go over to the store and get some flour and come on, man. Why would you break it up with a shopping scene? It needed to come to a big climax, a big gun battle. I know I'm being rough on this. But I can be rough on this because there are books by Louis L'Amour that were way, way better than this that I have read that were really impressive, really streamlined. But this is just not it. And really, personally, I think that Louis L'Amour shined better in short stories than in novels. I think that his short stories are far better than his novels, at least the ones that I have read. So you have like his collection Night Over the Solomons, which is about a pilot around 1930s who was going around the islands down in the South Pacific. Really good. Beyond the Great Snow Mountains, The Strong Shall Live. I love his short stories. And even his nonfiction is really, really good, like Yondering, or is it The Education of a Wandering Man? His memoir, his autobiography, really, really good. Some of his novels, and I mean, he wrote so many novels. He wrote something like 80 or 90, maybe even more than that. And so a few of them are bound to be less than good, right? And I think this is just one that was not very good. I have more Louis L'Amour novels I'm going to try to read for June on the Range. And we'll just have to see how that goes. So, not particularly impressive, entertaining, very, very frustrating to come to, the big thing that's going on, and then for it to just end, and then another big thing. It was very much a this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and this happened kind of novel. Okay. And so then I have been reading, like I said, the Sherlock Holmes stories, and I am up to The Adventure of the Golden Pince-Nez. And this is in The Return of Sherlock Holmes, so somewhere around 1903, 1904. I'm just going to talk about this book as a whole, not in bits and pieces, so later on. And then I have started a very slow, day-by-day reread of The Lord of the Rings. So this would be my third reread of The Lord of the Rings, my fourth reread of The Fellowship of the Ring. And I think I prefer The Fellowship of the Ring of all the it's not really three novels. It's one big book that was split into three sections. And I really prefer The Fellowship of the Ring. I know a lot of people find it really boring, but it's my favorite part of the whole story. And I am up to Chapter 5, A Conspiracy Unmasked. So this is right after Frodo and Pippin and Sam have crossed through the Shire. They are going to Frodo's supposedly new home in the place where he grew up as a child. And really, it's just an act to make everybody think that he is moving away, when really he is setting off for Rivendell with Sam. And in this chapter that's coming, I believe, Mary will join the party, and then they will leave for Rivendell. And or they leave in the beginning for the inn in that town, and they find Bill and Aragorn and everything, and so I'm really looking forward to that. I'm just doing a chapter a day, so I have 50 some odd days left in my reread of this, and I don't know if I'll be able to read a chapter every single day, and it doesn't really matter. I already know the story anyway. I'm just really rereading it for the flavor. And I was thinking about how a lot of people see this as like the greatest fantasy novel ever written. And I was just realizing that I don't think of this as being a fantasy novel. I think of this as being a great epic along the lines of the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Iliad or the Odyssey, right? And that's interesting, because that's really what Tolkien was going for. It is an epic story. And I don't know. I've just never seen it in the light of fantasy. I think maybe because so much fantasy that came after this was a pale imitation of The Lord of the Rings. And I know certainly some of the fantasy that I tried to read was a pale imitation of The Lord of the Rings, and so I never really was able to get into fantasy. But I love The Lord of the Rings. And that is it. So that's the two books that I read, and the books that I'm currently reading. Where Eagles Dare by Alistair MacLean, and Kilkenny by Louis L'Amour. And I want to thank you very much for joining me and suffering through this 40 some odd minute video. And hopefully I'll be able to cut that down. And I will see you next time.